Did you see the stylish?
Welcome to the Young IPA podcast. I'm James, this is Pete.
G'day, everyone.
It is the 30th of January. This is episode 143. Loaded show coming up. We've got Evan Mulholland right here with us. We're going to be talking about the top story of the day from the IPA's perspective. We've also got Matt Ridley on the show. One of my favourite interviews we've ever done. Maybe my favourite interview. It's like everything that Pete and I talk about and we like talking about, and it makes you feel so good about the direction of the world and where things are going, and it was just awesome.
Oh, no, exactly right. You're about to ask me what my favourite thing was. That was my favourite thing.
Yep.
One of our best interviews ever. Also, a bloke just trying to get to work with his strides off, which we'll talk about towards the end.
That's not Matt Ridley.
That is not Matt Ridley.
That is not Matt Ridley.
That is a separate thing.
All right. So we got Evan here. We want to talk about this story because obviously, like, the whole world is talking about two things, which is Kobe Bryant's death and also coronavirus. Neither of which are exactly Young IPA podcast stories.
We can't imagine.
But Evan, we do want to talk about this story because this is something that's was just fun. It's been a tough week from a few perspectives, but this is just fun. So, Evan, Malcolm Turnbull on the bushfires. Why don't you tell us where this started?
Well, over the last couple of weeks, Malcolm Turnbull has really piped up on climate change and the need to address climate change because of the bushfires. So he's ceded to the media narrative that it's all Scott Morrison's fault. He's had a big go at Scott Morrison, and he actually went to Davos, the big sort of international climate conference, and was swanning around there, doing interviews with the BBC. He did an interview with The Guardian as well, and here in Australia, basically saying that Scott Morrison should take advantage of this crisis and act radically on climate change to phase out coal completely from Australia, which would just be an absolute economic disaster any way you look at it. And he was saying, it's not about these fires are directly linked to climate change, and it shows a trend. Basically parallel with the arguments that the Greens have always made. So I thought, Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister for 3 years, right? And the Greens make this link every single year, and they make this, disgraceful claim during the worst parts of an emergency, like a bushfire. It's all to do with climate change, and this shows a need for climate action, which is completely wrong, first of all, but frankly insensitive.
So what did Evan, the Undertaker Mulholland, decide to do about that?
Is that what we're going with, the Undertaker? Because I like it.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I'll take it.
To the shadow realm.
So I thought he's definitely said it. Like, the Greens have come out at one point when he was Prime Minister and said it. So I simply just hopped onto his website, and I used the search button on Malcolm Turnbull's website. You can go to his website right now for those watching or listening. And I typed in Malcolm Turnbull, climate change, Greens. And it came up with a transcript of a press conference he gave in 2018 when terrible Tathra bushfires happened. I think about 60 or 70 homes were destroyed. And Richard Dinantale came out and said this shows the need to act on climate change. The Prime Minister should do more. And Malcolm Turnbull was actually quite right in saying no particular event can be linked to climate change, whether it be a flood or a fire, or strong winds, and he was disappointed in the Greens for politicising an event like bushfires.
So you see these two things, and you decide, I'm going to take this to a journalist. We're going to get this written up.
Yeah, so I kicked it around, so to speak, to a few journalists, and it was on Sky News, it was in the Australian, it was all over the place, and I think really highlighted the hypocrisy of Malcolm Turnbull, and Gideon posted about it on Twitter, which got heaps of traction as well. So it was good to see it, really exposed for what it was.
Yeah. So do you reckon this is Turnbull changing his mind, or we have this, and then we've also got Tanya Plibersek in the quiz later in the show, which is this: are politicians just politicians, and they'll just say whatever it takes to, just support the party line, or just get things over the edge, or just protect their own interests?
Yeah. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull was right in 2018 with what he was saying. Now, he's simply just, it's all about legacy for him. It's all about the fact that he got done over again, because of his, climate policies, because of the neg, technically. I think he got done over by his own incompetence, but that's a different story. And this is, trying to craft the narrative that he was the one who wanted to act on climate change, and it was the dinosaurs in the Liberal Party that, brought him down. Yet, he had people nodding behind him. He was saying exactly the same things that Scott Morrison is saying now, that it was all about sort of hazard reduction and fuel load that needs to be worked on. And he's now that he's not in a position to do something, criticising Scott Morrison for saying exactly the same thing as the bloke who is in a position to do something. Like, it's just ridiculous.
So now this is what you love doing this stuff, right? This is your bread and butter. You love being, either cutting people down or being a kingmaker in the Australian political scene. That's why we call you the Undertaker. Is this the most fun you've had at work, or is there something even more fun than this?
Oh, it was pretty fun to see. There's been a few other occasions where we've knocked out a poll. I love the Australia Day polls, as we saw last week, and seeing something go from an idea that's talked about in the office to the front pages is a great part of my job, and I love doing it.
All right, so rank the people that have been more annoying. Out of the two people that were Prime Minister and now just seem to be just annoying people, Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull, who has been more annoying out of office?
Good question.
Malcolm Turnbull is really, punching for that gold medal.
Yeah.
I'd almost say they're equal. You've got a situation now where we've got. Let's compare our four most recent former prime ministers. You've got, Julia Gillard, and whatever you thought about her in office, she's handled herself pretty gracefully post-politics, doesn't 100%. Get involved in domestic politics. Yep. A chair of Beyond Blue, helping poor countries get and people get access to education. Tony Abbott literally fighting fires for the last few months. And both Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd tweeting about climate change and tweeting about News Corp.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's all.
And both living in New York or hopping between New York and Australia.
Yeah, it's just like, it's hard for me because you go, Malcolm Turnbull's currently probably louder just because of the fact that he still has more influence. But there's just a special level of disappointing in Kevin Rudd writing letters to Jacobin magazine. It's like how just self-policing he is on just, typing his name into Twitter, just figuring out what comes out, just any mention going, right, that's today's morning. We are going to tell Jacobin magazine who's boss around here.
Yeah.
So I reckon, Turnbull was more influential, but Kevin Rudd's just a bit more like, dude, what are you doing? Pete, what do you reckon?
Malcolm Turnbull's more recent, and also, Evan's a big coalition man, so he'd feel more about Malcolm Turnbull because he took over his party. Whereas Kevin Rudd, you always expect the other team to be
They're both
annoying.
Just, old men yelling at clouds.
Yes.
Basically at the moment.
And in lockstep with each other. All right, so sweet. So people can read Gideon's article, which went off. Gideon's article on our website. Everyone really liked that article, so go read that at ipa.org.au. Evan, thanks for coming on, and we're going to have the Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort play you off, which is quickly becoming one of my favourite things we do here.
Excellent.
Thanks Undertaker.
Okay, that is the snort of freedom, Grunt the Pig, telling us that we're about to do the heroes and villains segment. So we'll start off with the heroes, the people that have stood up for freedom around the world this week, and we want to acknowledge them. Pete, who have you got?
I've got man who confronted Elizabeth Warren.
So we get a name?
He's unknown. No one knows who he is. Elizabeth Warren, of course, is going for the Democrat nominee for president.
Yep.
She's proposed to cancel $640 billion in student loans, up to $50,000 a person. She says her
Sign me up.
Exactly. She says her plans would benefit 42 million Americans, but it does not address the millions of Americans who have worked hard to put their kids through college, or kids who paid for themselves to go through college. One Iowa father confronted her at a recent event during the week. Here he is.
My daughter's getting out of school. I saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loans. Am I going to get my money back? Of course not. So you're going to pay for people who didn't save any money, and those of us that did the right thing get screwed.
No, it's not anybody got screwed. When we
Of course we did. My buddy had fun, bought a car, went on vacations. I saved my money. He made more than I did. But I worked a double shift, worked extra. My daughter's work sheet is 10. So you're laughing. Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing.
Now, my favourite part of this, James,
Yep.
is when she goes, of course not. Of course you won't be paid back for your hard work.
Yeah, what do you think? This is fair? It's
Yeah,
not fair.
We're going to reward effort?
Yeah.
How quaint.
Yeah. What a novel concept.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, like, the thing is, this guy gets screwed over even harder by this deal because, you know, you can only pay this guy back money, but you can't pay him back, like, oh, you didn't go on that holiday because you wanted to, yeah, like, you can't give a guy a holiday. You know what I mean? You can't give a guy a holiday
It's in the past.
in that time. It's gone. It's not coming back. So you can only do the money. You can't do the emotional stuff as well.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So to Iowa man, you're my hero this week. And his
Right.
daughter, because she paid for it as well.
Now, Pete, I gave you crap for not knowing who this guy was, but I also I'm not able to like quite narrow in on a singular person that is my hero this week.
Yeah.
It might wheel around to Joe Biden eventually. Stick with me. But so anyway, like there was this whole thing this week because Joe Rogan on his podcast said he'd vote for Bernie Sanders in the election.
Which is a touch disappointing.
Yeah.
To me.
So he says that. He says, I reckon Bernie Sanders, I'd vote for him. Then this like hard left freakout on Twitter comes out and, you know, and all these papers as well, because Joe Rogan doesn't think that transgender athletes should compete against female competitors in the MMA. And people say Bernie Sanders shouldn't accept Joe Rogan's support because he's a transphobe. And like, I like it, and they're my heroes because I don't want Bernie Sanders president, and any efforts to stop that, of the hard left eating itself and people fighting this one out over anything else helps. I just want to give a quick shout out to Joe Biden, who tweeted this like moments after the Joe Rogan thing came out. Which, for people listening at home, is him tweeting, "Let's be clear, transgender equality is the civil rights issue of our time. There's no room for compromise when it comes to basic human rights." I just want to ask Joe Biden, when did you believe that? Was it like 10 years ago? Was it 5 years ago? Was it when the social media intern ran in with this story and said we should do something about this?
Yeah.
Like, when did it become the defining moment of our time?
There's been a lot of politicians changing their views in this
Very
episode.
quickly. It seems to be a recurrent theme in this episode. So... yeah, Bernie Sanders supporters / detractors are freaking out that Joe Rogan, the biggest podcaster in the world, his support might make him too electable to audiences that might not vote for Bernie Sanders anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, that genre of people are my hero of the week.
So just to be clear, it's the left eating itself is
Yes,
your hero.
you
That's
should have
deep,
done
man.
that one.
That's quite deep.
Yeah, thank you for putting it in exact words rather than just babble I came out with.
No, I'm impressed. That's a good one. All
All
right.
right.
Now, we've been looking for a new name for Villain of the Week, James. So we used to have the Walter Peck Villainy Award. We didn't like it that much, so we've changed it. As you guys know, I've been showing this footage fairly regularly.
Extinction Rebellion protests enter their 6th day. The activists are trying to pressure the Australian government.
Now, that is the Extinction Rebellion protesters, as we've spoken about many times on this
So
show.
over this, but-
in October, doing a fake nudie run,
Yep.
where they said we're doing a nudie run, we're going to save the planet, and then none of them were nude. I'm sorry, people, that is not a nudie run. So as a result, James actually had the brainwave. I'm surprised that he said we should name the Villain Award the Extinction Rebellion Fake Nudie Run Award.
I did not have that idea.
So that's
Don't
what
put
we're
this on
going to do.
me. I don't want this clip played.
So, James, if you want to get to the bare facts of your pick for
Oh,
this week,
boy.
the bare facts.
Oh, no. I was wondering why you were giggling for an hour at your desk. All right. Sorry. My villain of the week this week. So, people might have seen there was a story that Mike Pompeo was being interviewed by an NPR journalist on the trip. Mike Pompeo is being interviewed by an NPR journalist, and Mike Pompeo gets so angry with her about this Ukraine and Russia and deal that he eventually makes staffers come over with a blank map and says, "You know what? Point to Ukraine right now. If you're such an expert, point to Ukraine." And
so
then
he
the
came with
NPR
the map.
host immediately points to Ukraine and then walks off. Power move.
Yeah, that's good.
So, people are talking about this, and I just want to play this clip from a CNN show hosted by Don Lemon, where you've got panelists, Rick Wilson and Wahajid Ali. They're talking about this conference, and they just want to talk about how, they sort of reveal how they feel about Trump voters. It's very subtle. But see if you can pick it up.
Playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's the smart one, and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps, in your spelling.
That is just Trump's campaign ad for 2020. Like, just play that. You don't need any music. You don't need anything else. You don't need anything at all. You just play that clip.
Absolutely right. When people ask, I can't understand why people vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's why.
That is the reason.
That is what they think of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is my villain of the week.
Yeah, and also that host, he was doing that thing like that. The thing about that was it actually wasn't that funny.
No.
He's doing that thing hardcore, whereas if I just laugh hard enough, everyone will be convinced this is funny.
Yes, exactly.
It wasn't.
Which is a podcast staple from our perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know what you're doing, mate. I know what you're doing.
Good one, Pete.
All right,
your villain of the week.
My villain of the week, my Extinction Rebellion Fake Nudie Run Award of the week, Dr. James.
Villain of the week.
Dr. James Mukey, Australian of the Year this week. So he's an Adelaide eye doctor who founded an organisation called Sight for All that trains eye doctors from developing countries and impacts 1 million people a year. So obviously I've made him my villain of the week.
Yes.
And I was reading...
You shock jock.
I was reading his bio. I'm like, why am I doing this? Anyway, the reason I'm doing this is because no sooner had he rightly won the award for all his great work than he said, I think we need to take sweet products away from checkout counters, particularly when they're discounted. We've got to make them less accessible to the public. He said a sugar tax should be on the table to address the sugar that we're apparently eating too much sugar, blah, 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 blah. It would be nice to have an Australian of the Year that doesn't use their platform to immediately introduce, more laws and more control over us. I hate this stuff that I'm an expert. I know what's better for these silly poor people. I'm an expert in one area of life, therefore I know the economic and political solutions for everything else. So, James
That's
Mukey,
why they should make you Australian of the Year. Because you would only just get up and encourage people to froth.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's your entire speech.
Just to live your life.
Yeah.
So, no, James Mukey, reluctantly, despite all your good work, you have my Extinction Rebellion Fake Nudie Run Villain Award for this week.
I just want to highlight one quote from that article where he's talking about the problems with sugar. But he says this: sugar is cheap and ubiquitous, so it's readily accessible to everyone. You walk into a service station, there's a counter of lollies as you walk in. Now, is that a point for him or against him? Because that sounds awesome.
It is awesome.
Yeah, how good is that? You walk into a service station and there's just a million things that taste nice.
Readily available confectionery.
Yeah.
You beauty.
The beautiful world. All right. Speaking of things that are readily available and plentiful in a free market world, we'll now go to an interview with Matt Ridley. That is a segue for the
ages.
That is a segue for the ages. And now I'm tripping over it by explaining my genius. So let's just go to that interview before I make this worse for myself.
Yeah.
Okay, we now welcome on to the show someone I am really excited to speak to. Matt Ridley, author and columnist, member of the House of Lords, board member of the awesome Human Progress, which you can check out at humanprogress.org, and author of the also awesome The Rational Optimist. So, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Awesome. So, in your recent Spectator article, which Pete and I absolutely loved, and everyone should read it. If you don't have a Spectator UK login, it's also available at Human Progress, I think. But anyway, you said that the 2010s were the best decade ever. Now, why is that?
Yeah, well, this came about because I wrote a book in 2010 called The Rational Optimist, saying the world had been getting better, not worse, and was likely to continue doing so. And that was quite a brave thing to say at the time, because the world was still trying to recover from a terrible deep recession that some people thought might be the beginning of a Great Depression for the globe. But looking back 10 years later, I suddenly realized that actually the numbers suggest that this was the best decade ever, which is quite remarkable when you think how gloomy we were throughout most of it about everything from, from climate change to the Euro crisis to the wars in Ukraine to the wars in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. So Syria, I should have added to that. So a lot of bad things happened in the 2010s. But if you look at the main numbers on human progress, how many people were in poverty at the end of the decade compared with the beginning, that number roughly halves. If you look at child mortality, the greatest measure of misery anybody can think of, it continued its relentless fall. If you look at growth of incomes in Africa, the poorest continent, you see remarkable improvement. So if you look at humanity as a whole, this was a very, very good decade.
So, Matt, I didn't realise that actually that article was a bit of a victory lap for you. So congratulations on having those predictions being correct. Now, we hear a lot. Oh, actually, one of the things we loved about the article was that it said kind of in another way that we can have economic growth and we can have environmental protection. We have people like David Attenborough saying that you can't have that. We have Greta Thunberg saying we're in the beginning of a mass extinction and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. Is economic growth and the environment a zero-sum game, or do they help each other?
Right. Well, that's the issue that I specifically focused on in that recent article. to me, this is a remarkable and extraordinary phenomenon, which people are beginning to wake up to, namely that economic growth is the best hope for saving the environment. Now, that might seem paradoxical to people, and indeed I quote David Attenborough as saying, anyone who thinks that infinite growth on a finite planet is possible is either mad or an economist. That's intended as an insult to economists. But actually, I think he's wrong. And the reason for that is because as we grow, we use fewer resources, not more. The whole point of economic growth is to be more efficient in our use of resources. So if you take land, for example, we're using 68% less land to produce a given quantity of food averaged over the whole world as we did in the 1960s. That's an enormous improvement in the productivity of land, and it means we actually need less land now to feed 7 billion people than we needed to feed 3 billion people when I was born. That's a reduction in our demands on the planet, and it spares land for nature. Another example is water. If you take predictions made in the 60s and 70s for how much water we were going to need in the United States, this is specifically, by now, we're using a lot less than that. And I also give the trivial example of a drinks can, an ordinary aluminium drinks can, now contains 13 grams of aluminium. When they were first invented, the early 1960s, there were about 80 grams in a drinks can. It's getting thinner, it's getting smaller. We're using less steel in buildings, etc., etc. So actually, the evidence suggests that the countries that are doing best in conserving and repopulating wildlife in their countrysides are the rich countries. It's the poor countries that are still cutting down forests and still seeing reduced numbers of animals and plants and so on.
And the thing for me is that when you have these environmentalists saying we need to put all these protections in place and stop the economic growth, it's, they're being their own worst enemies. If you're really concerned about conservation, then you need to get out of the way of the development of the free market to make these new industries.
Well, if you think about it, I have a rather glib way of putting this, which is that why is it that wolves are increasing in number in the world, lions are decreasing, and tigers are now roughly holding their own? The tiger population is slightly inching up at the moment. And the reason is because lions live in poor countries, wolves live in rich countries, and tigers live in middle-income countries. And when you think about it, in Africa, a lot of wildlife is in competition with human beings. People are still having to go into the forests either to get bushmeat or to get firewood for cooking over and so on. If instead they were going to shops and they were getting their energy from gas or something like that, then there would be much less demand on natural habitats. And if you take the environmentalist prescription that we should all go back to nature and get in touch with nature and sort of live harmoniously in nature, 7 billion people going back to nature would be a disaster for nature. In fact, some of the worst extinctions, the biggest wave of extinction was caused by Stone Age people 10,000 years ago on arrival in the North American continent and the South American continent, and a little earlier than that in Australia and in New Zealand and in Madagascar. As soon as human beings turn up, there's a wave of extinction of the so-called megafauna, the biggest beasts, a really spectacular extinction. And that's caused by, men with spears. You don't need high technology to have a huge impact on the environment. In fact, in many ways, high technology helps you avoid having a high impact on the environment.
This kind of viewpoint for a lot of people, particularly young people in Australia and around the world, would be absolutely mind-blowing. Like, it's just not the argument that you hear very often. Given so many column inches and so much attention is given to climate issues, and particularly here in Australia, we've just had these bushfires, and I can tell you it is absolutely dominating the news cycle. How come, or can you give us a little bit of an insight as to maybe why this is such a rare message and why this is such a hard sell to environmentalists to convince them of this?
As a general rule, bad news sells. And for as long as human beings have been around, prophets of doom have been listened to more than optimists. You go right back to the golden age of Greece itself in the Bronze Age, in the early Iron Age. They're lamenting the loss of innocence of the modern world. They're saying it's getting worse, etc., etc. And So every generation has people saying, okay, it's got better so far, but it's about to get a lot worse. So there is nothing new in this telling young people that the world is doomed. And I often say to young people, when I was your age, in the early 1970s, when I was a teenager, I was very, very worried about the future of the world. I was quite interested in all these issues, and I was extremely terrified because the grown-ups told me that the population explosion was unstoppable, famine was inevitable, cancer epidemic caused by the chemicals that we were putting into the environment was going to shorten our lives, the deserts were advancing, the forests were retreating, the ozone layer was disappearing, acid rain was killing the forests, sperm counts were falling, every conceivable environmental scare was getting worse and worse and worse. And the prospects for my future were pretty gloomy. And actually, if you go back and look at the books written at the time by people like Paul Ehrlich's best-selling books, Robert Heilbronner wrote a book saying, the outlook for man is bleak. I read this stuff. And it scared the daylights out of me. I thought, oh my God, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Or I don't know what kind of job I'm going to get. There aren't obviously going to be any jobs. I believed it. And I never heard adults saying, you know what, instead of that, it's possible that the world might get richer and cleaner. And we might reduce the rate of extinctions, which we have. The number of extinctions has been going down pretty spectacularly in the last few decades because of the work of conservationists. So what I'm trying to tell to young people is don't believe every gloomy prognostication, because there's a huge vested interest of the news media in appealing to people's pessimisms. And do remember that we can, the whole point is we can solve some of these problems. We don't have to have a council of despair. And at the moment, we seem to be telling young people about climate change that there is only bad news, that there is not a possibility of solving this problem. And I simply don't believe that. I think, A, we're exaggerating the problem, and B, we're underestimating the power of ingenuity to deal with the problem.
Yeah, I think it goes even further than climate change. Like, I had this when I was, when I read your book and was talking about it with friends, and then I'm getting it again now when I've just finished Enlightenment Now, the Steven Pinker book, and I'm talking about that with friends. And I've been doing this thing where I just say to them, what do you reckon the life expectancy around the world is? And not a single person I've talked to has overshot the mark. Like, I've heard 40, I've heard 50, I've heard 55, but no one has ever gone above it, which is 71.7. Like, I just think this relentless pessimism is not just climate change. It's like it goes out into literally every way of measuring where life is going.
Yeah, well, Hans Rosling, who is something of a godfather to both myself and Steve Pinker in terms of getting to this point about optimism before us as a writer. Sadly, he died a few years ago, but Hans Rosling did a rather brilliant experiment before he died, which was to ask 1,000 people, initially in the US, but it was repeated in other countries, what, in the last 20 years, do you think that the percentage of the world population that lives in extreme poverty has doubled, halved, or stayed the same? So that's three possible answers. And about 65% of people said they thought it had doubled, that there were twice as many people in extreme poverty today as 20 years before. And only 5% thought it had halved. Well, the 5% are right. It has halved in that time, roughly speaking. But Rosling then said, if I wrote those three answers on 3 bananas and threw them into a cage with a chimpanzee in it and measured which banana was picked up by the chimpanzee first, it would get the right answer 33% of the time. Whereas human beings are only getting the right answer 5% of the time. How is it possible that human beings know more about the state of humanity? Than chimpanzees know more about the state of humanity than human beings do.
They are a very smart animal.
This is a ridiculous situation. And of course, the answer to his question is because it's not what we don't know that's transfixing us, but what we know for sure that ain't so. We persuade ourselves of things that we think are facts, but in fact are not.
It sort of goes a little bit deeper than that. I think with the environmentalist movement not accepting that optimistic story, often I find they've stood in the way of things that would make things better for the planet. For example, nuclear power has almost no emissions.
GM crops. Yeah.
Exactly right. Going to use far less land for agriculture. What do you think that is, and where do you think that comes from?
Right. Well, in the case of GM crops, I mean, I've just written a passionate article about golden rice, which is this wonderful invention 20 years ago by Ingo Petraikas in Switzerland of a vitamin-enhanced variety of rice that could help deal with enormous numbers of people who are going blind and dying in urban settings in Asia mainly, where they rely on rice for diet and they end up vitamin A deficient and their immune system is compromised as a result. Now, the sole and principal opposition to this over the last 20 years, which has been very effective and very powerful, has come from Greenpeace. Why would you want children to go on dying? I just don't understand the mentality that says that. And it's not as if GM crops have proved to be bad for the environment. Quite the reverse. The amount of pesticide used is down by about 37% on average around the world wherever GM crops are introduced. The yields are up, so you need less land. This is a good news technology, and yet environmentalists have opposed it every step of the way. They oppose shale gas extraction, fracking, their latest campaigns. And yet this is the cleanest of the fossil fuels. It's done a terrific job of displacing coal in North America. And it comes from a very small piece of land, so it doesn't need as much land as a lot of the renewables do. It doesn't need as much mining to support its activities. So I'm sorry, but the environmental movement is often actually making environmental problems worse. I mean, in Europe, we had the case where environmentalists pushed for diesel as a way of getting carbon dioxide emissions down. That resulted in worse air quality than we would otherwise have had if we'd stuck to petrol engines and so on. So somebody has to call out these very big, very powerful organizations. I mean, the big three, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and World Wildlife Fund, between them have something like $1 billion a year in income. These are giant multinational corporations with well-paid chief executives and big treasury functions and all the usual things that come with Goldman Sachs-like operations. But unlike those businesses, they don't have to actually produce products. Their product is fear and alarm and therefore donations. It's a virtuous circle. And I think, people have got to start standing up to these organizations and stop treating them as somehow virtuous. I don't think they are virtuous. I think they're genuinely dangerous.
Yeah, I would combine exactly what you're saying about golden rice, which, by the way, that was an awesome article, with the stuff we were talking about at the start of the interview where we talk about this hostility to economic growth. I mean, maybe there's some sort of definition breakdown, but when I hear economic growth, I think of poor people getting out of poverty, and this idea that we should it's this frivolous side thing, I just think is disgusting. But if you're against economic growth, if you're against the stuff that gets people out of poverty, and then you're also against golden rice, which stops, children being blind, I don't know how you can have that vision unless you started to think that humans were innately, they operated against the planet. They're a virus on this planet, and you don't want to help them proliferate.
Well, there is a strong streak of misanthropy in the environmental movement, whereby anything human beings do or invent is a bad thing, and that seems to me a pity. In the round, you can't deny that by inventing industrial civilization, we've enabled more people to live on the planet, and that does have pollution consequences and so on. But we've dealt with them. We've made the air cleaner, the water cleaner, etc. And I actually think that if you look at the numbers, if you look at this extraordinary reduction in the amount of stuff we need, and countries like the UK and the US are now using less stuff overall every year. If you look at minerals, metals, and fuels produced and imported, the number is going down, even though the population is still going up and wealth is still going up. It's possible to see a future in which by the end of the century, there are 8, 9, 10 billion people, whatever it is, living with a lighter imprint on the planet than they do today, with a lot more land released for nature, with much larger national parks, with not only very many fewer species going extinct, but also some species brought back from extinction by genetic technologies and so on. So I actually have a vision of a really fantastic environmental future as a result of technology, as a result of innovation. And on the whole, innovation is good for the environment, not bad. That much is abundantly clear from the last 2 centuries.
Now, Matt, your next book is out in May. It's called How Innovation Works and Why It Flourishes in Freedom. Can you give us a taste of what you're looking at in that one? Well,
I've decided it's time to look at innovation as a whole, what it is, why it happens to us and not to rabbits and rocks. It's a surprisingly mysterious process, I've decided, I've concluded, because we know it's important. It's a huge part of everyday life. We get used to having new consumer gadgets all the time. Where do they come from? Who comes up with these ideas? What's the process by which it emerges? It's a much more collective, much more distributed process than we tend to give it credit for. We say so-and-so invented something and he's a genius and he deserves a Nobel Prize and a patent. Actually, that's very misleading. Most of these things are the result of people collaborating and combining ideas. It's a process of recombination of ideas that produces all this. And it's an inexorable, inevitable process. But what I'm trying to do in this forthcoming book is just tell stories about all the innovations that have altered our lives over, not all, but many innovations that have altered our lives, and draw lessons as to what's happening and what this mysterious process of innovation is. And I've had a lot of fun writing the book, and I hope people are going to enjoy reading it when it comes out in May.
I absolutely can't wait to read it. Matt Ridley, people have got to go out. They've got to read this article. They've got to read your essay on golden rice. And they've got to definitely read The Rational Optimist if they haven't already. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Great to talk to you, and my best to everyone at the IPA.
All right, we've got another round of the Young IPA quiz. Hey, what did we miss? Back on the show is returning champion Gideon Rozner, going for the three-peat.
Going for a hat-trick today.
The hat-trick.
Yeah.
All right, Morgan
Pressure's
Begg,
on.
research fellow. Been a while since you've been on, but always good to have you on.
Good to see you, Morgan.
And, of course, the roof seal himself, Peter Gregory.
And I found the dunce hat.
That's
and when
good.
I say found the dunce hat, it was sitting here when I walked in.
Yeah, the last place you'd look.
I'm nervous for today. I mean, Morgan's actually smart. He actually knows something about
He's
world
across the
affairs
world.
and everything else. So
yeah, he's a the reason he knows it is because he shapes the world.
This is the most devious thing that Gideon's ever said. He's really heightened expectations for me.
A false sense of security. You have a serious researcher versus, a loudmouth. I mean, we'll see which is superior.
And Pete's also
on the roof seal.
All right, cool. Sorry, if it is your first quiz, we've got 9 questions and a who am I. There is 1 point on for correct answers and 1 point off for incorrect answers. And your buzzers will be your first name. So, question 1.
Yeah.
What song was the number 1 in the Triple J Hottest 100?
Roof. Billie Eilish.
Yep. Artist.
And the song was that song she does about Bad Guy.
Bad Guy. He's got it. Yes. All right, we're off to a flyer.
I actually liked it.
Yeah, it's that was the first time in years I thought number 1 should have been number 1, but I digress. Okay, so Brexit about to pass in the next couple of days. Britain finally out of the EU. What was the original day to the Brexit vote?
Oh no, that's just
1484.
Seems like it.
Do we get half a point for the month and year?
Yeah, sure, why not? Just keep the energy up.
June 2016.
He'd be right. So he's got 0.5 of a point.
Okay.
Yes.
Can our graphics team even put 0.5 on the scoreboard?
Well, we'll have to talk to
scrambling. They're googling it out.
Yeah, what is a decimal? All right, so for
just broke the IPA computer.
What is a decimal? I apologise on Bob's behalf, Josh.
Question 3. How many times in total was Brexit officially delayed?
Gideon.
9,000.
Okay, so...
Yeah, is that also 2016?
I would say twice.
I'm not going to take points off for those two.
I want to say twice.
They were funny. You'd be incorrect. Does anyone want to have another guess?
Negative 0.5.
4. Oh, Morgan.
4.
No. Roof. Let's go for 3.
He's correct.
Thanks, fellas.
How'd you know that, Pete?
I didn't understand.
The Goldilocks answer has paid off.
Well, hold the questions away a little bit.
Sorry.
There's a danger. I don't want to...
Oh, this has been winning all this time.
There we go. This is the
I was
primary
sitting in that
seat.
seat last time.
This is a primary
I'm honest
Sad thing
roster.
is,
I cannot tell a
I was
lie.
here first and I didn't sit there.
Yeah, I know.
Honest
You were skulking around the desk. I was like, he's going to read the questions, but no. All right. Question number 4 we're up to. All right. Closest to the mark of Kobe Bryant dying this week. Very sad day. For me...
Yeah, how are you dealing with that?
It
No,
actually
it's a
hit me.
serious question.
It actually hit me way harder than I thought it
Because
would.
can I tell you, I used to think like people who used to go on about the day that Kurt Cobain died and everything else, I thought they were full of rubbish. But when Anthony Bourdain died, I couldn't speak for like a solid hour. It's actually a really harrowing thing.
No,
Something
I was,
to
just,
admire.
I was pretty flat for the whole morning.
Yeah,
It's just
I can
like
imagine.
Such a
I thought
force
of you, yeah.
personality. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to get
We're a
sad if
tolerant
Thank
and
you.
kind workplace
Thank
here
you,
at the
Gideon.
IPA.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to get sad if I think about it too much. So, closest to the mark.
Yeah.
How many points did Kobe Bryant score in his NBA career?
Oh,
Gideon.
That is.
Gideon.
200.
200? Okay, a few
Morgan.
more than that. 82 game season.
Oh.
He's
18-year
not a big
career.
basketball fan.
15,000.
15,000.
Great
Pete?
proof. Oh,
Yeah.
20,000.
It is 33,643.
I was clearly the closest.
Like I said, 20-year career.
Yeah, 20-year career. Fourth all time.
Yeah.
And damn it, my quiz, my questions. How many championships did Kobe Bryant win? Morgan.
I believe it was 5 championships.
It was indeed 5.
Jeez, Triple J and sport questions. This is rigged against Rozner. This is,
Actually.
All right, well, you've always got the who am I, and there's a few more political ones coming up. So
Right.
quick score check. Gideon on
if you ask me
negative...
health and fitness questions, I'll be a goner.
All right, well, I'll scrap the quiz. So Gideon's on negative 0.5. Morgan is on 0. Pete, flying away on 3 points.
On 3 points?
He's on 3 points.
The roof's here.
I'm not sure that's true, but let's
All right,
stick
what,
with it.
What would not be true? Let me get...
No, I'm sure it's right.
I'm
mate.
sure it's right.
fine.
We're all sure it's right.
got the
Get that
dunce
dunce out away from me. All right, so what does Tanya Plibersek want all Australian students to be taught in
Gideon.
schools? Gideon.
A pledge of allegiance
Socialism.
or patriotism of some kind? Oh,
Postmodernism.
no, she's good. She's good on this. This
Gideon
is
is correct.
Yeah.
Is
Good
she
on
good
you,
on
Tanya.
this, or do politicians just... Are they just politicians?
So I hear that she's been good on this for a while, but it wouldn't surprise me. A cynic in me says it's her trying to cast off the inner city member for Sydney sort of image, maybe.
But I
priming
mean,
for the
Like,
leadership.
she's literally been in favour of a citizenship pledge from all students for years.
Yeah,
Don't buy it.
I'm not sold. Well,
It's
she's
allegiance
been-
to the Queen, or it's not worth it.
It's not gone far enough.
We
Morgan.
asked our politicians to respond to democracy.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what she's doing. We can't then crack it at them when they...
No, credit was. I'm not quite sold on the
It should be
pledge. I think that's
Morgan's
a bit sort of artificial. But yeah, patriotism shouldn't be a left-right issue. We're all patriots.
All right.
But the right are more patriotic.
Very good point. And we'll, all right, so next one up. Why did Yale University scrap Introduction to Art History, Renaissance to the Present? Gideon.
Because it was too white and
Too what, sorry?
white and you know the
You have to do
white-
that same
pale
inflection for the
style.
Yes, pale male
I
style
have to
is
speak like
correct.
a crooked southern governor, do I? It's too
White,
white,
too
white,
male.
too male.
Yes, that is the reason they're scrapping it. It's one of the most beloved courses that Yale had, apparently, and then it's gone because pale male style.
All the students are racist. They love white people things. I mean, that's obviously what the problem
That's
is.
the takeaway I've got.
The
All right,
white
so
supremacists.
Gideon making a quick run for it. He's now up to 1.5. Peter Gregory still on 3. No, you're on 2.5. My bad. Gideon.
So 2.5 versus
2.5, 3, 0. All right, so how many Australian Opens has Rafael Nadal won? Morgan.
Come on.
5.
5 is incorrect.
Why do I guess when I know there's points taken away?
That's the strategy.
There is one. You would have thought it's way more than that, but yeah, Rafael Nadal, the
Because
winner
he's
of
not that good
only one. Oh.
on that surface. I don't know much about tennis.
That's true.
I thought we were just going to wade into some serious Federer v Nadal territory, and I would definitely get Gideon to answer. All right, Gideon, this is a sport question I reckon you might actually get.
Third sport question. This isn't the bloody Institute of Armchair
It's just
Sports or
sport.
something. This isn't Barstool Sports.
I
We need a
would be
shit talk
paid so
equivalent
much more if it
podcast.
was. All right, a team from which country signed Israel Folau to a contract
Gideon.
this morning? Gideon.
France.
I told you you'd get it.
That I knew.
All right, now for an unprecedented bonus point at the end of this round,
Oh.
what was the name of the team? No points off, but bonus point if you can get it.
Absolutely no idea.
Oh, I saw it last night at like Sky.
This is your... You should know this, Gideon. This is your brief, mate.
I know about Folau. I wouldn't.
I
know
did
who the
read
hell-
it, but I'm not
All right,
playing
it's
the guessing
Catalan
game anymore.
Dragons. So coming into the Who Am I, Peter's on 4,
Catalan Dragons.
Gideon is on 2.5, and
So
Morgan is
3.5
on
versus 4.
3.5. And there is definitely no way this is correct. I will take that. I think
you are right.
I think I've been good at it, but I've also probably been terrible at it. So for all the marbles, because I've got no idea who's winning, Morgan's right back in it.
Oh, okay.
No, so all right. So assuming it is 3.5 to Gideon and Pete is on 4
Yeah.
and Morgan is on -1.
Yeah.
The Who Am I is still in play for everyone.
Yeah, it's going to come down. to
Okay.
So I need to get it first go.
You need to do the Pat Hannaford Hail Mary.
If you get it first go, you can have it.
Okay. Who am I? I was assassinated 72 years ago this Thursday.
Morgan.
Yeah,
Now let's figure out what 72 years ago was.
1957. Good at maths.
Was it?
Don't know, Pete.
1947. Hey, what?
It's 2020.
Yeah. Oh, it's 2020. I thought it was 2019.
Geez, I'm
How many
drawing
years
a
ago?
blank on.
All right, 72 years ago.
1948. There we go.
He's got it. Any guesses?
It's good
I'm
that you-
trying. I'm,
Yep.
I'm formulating a guess. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about people.
As long as it's
that
out loud.
existed-
Just got to keep that energy up.
Existed in that
The
period
podcast
of
can
time.
only go for an hour
No,
more.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I'll have to pass on that one. I can't,
right.
I can't think of it.
Okay, for 4 points,
Yeah.
my first job was a lawyer.
Gideon.
no idea.
Gideon.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Got it. All right.
Yeah,
That is amazing.
Three-peat confirmed.
What's the thought process? How'd you get that?
Because I thought, well, 1948, I thought, what happened in 1948? Establishment of Israel and India, I think, was in 48, and the partition of India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
And I knew Gandhi was a lawyer, so yeah.
There we go. The
you go.
peek behind the curtain that is the ever-quick mind of Gideon Rozner.
Okay, let's ask 5 sports questions next week.
All right, I'll keep flooding the market to get
yeah.
Peter Gregory back on top.
Yeah.
It's been a while since his last win, but anyway, Gideon, congratulations. Morgan, thanks for playing.
Yeah.
And we've got more show for you coming up after this.
Let's do it.
All right, thank you to Matt Ridley, and I thought you were going to win that quiz. To be honest, I thought you'd come in at the end and really, take it from Gideon.
Yeah, well, as you rightly pointed out, there was lots of sports questions, which was good.
Yeah, I'm trying to play to a home field advantage, but
He got Gandhi pretty early.
he got Gandhi very early. All right, let us go to some stories that have made us laugh this week. Now, Pete,
Yeah, mate.
talk to us.
Okay, BBC Today's program.
That was not as good a segue. Someone into the Matt Ridley interview. I'll be the first one to admit.
That's fair enough. As long as you can understand your own flaws, that's fine. So,
I'm very understanding of my own flaws.
And
Trust me.
Frankie on today's BBC's Today program. Now, she is the head of the Chartered Management Institute in the United Kingdom. And I Googled, what the hell is that? It is an accredited professional institution for management based in the United Kingdom. So it literally could be anything. Now, she said on BBC Today's program during the week, a lot of women in particular feel left out. They don't. So she was talking about cricket and footy in the workplace. She said a lot of women in particular feel left out. They don't follow those sports and they don't like being either forced to talk about them or not being included. So she was on the radio suggesting that workplaces cut back, not ban, but cut back talking about footy and cricket in the workplace.
Yeah. Now, Pete,
Here we go.
are females able to talk about sport?
Well, I always thought they were. And is Anne Frankie going to have to fall on her sword for clearly being absolutely sexist like heaps of other people would be in that situation? That's my question.
Now, the other thing I want to talk about. So here's an actual quote from her. So she goes, "It's very easy for it to escalate from VAR talk." Now, for the uninitiated, VAR, apparently, I didn't know it either, but it's video assistant refereeing. So is that like instant replays?
Yeah, it's like when they score a
Pete
goal
knows about more soccer than I do.
and they check if it's offside or something.
Okay, so
They just introduced it.
All right, so it's very easy for it to escalate from instant replay chat to slapping each other on the back and talking about their conquests at the weekend.
That's right.
Now, could you imagine? Could you
Are you
imagine
sure?
in like a group of like 4 dudes you work with, someone just going like, "Did you watch the game last night?" And someone going like, "Couldn't." You won't believe what I was doing instead. It's like, okay, Gary, we get it.
Yeah.
Not the time.
Exactly
Never the
right.
time. Never the time, Gary.
Yeah.
The other part I like about it is I can't remember what I like about it.
Well, my question
Sorry.
was...
I've lost my place. Go.
My question
Save
about
me.
this whole thing is basically why rich people are so stupid. Like, this woman will get paid so much.
Yeah.
And this is...
And she's never been in a workplace in her life.
This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The other part, no, so this is the part I like. So in the article, they try to get a few quotes from other people that might slam it. And one person they talk to is former Minister Tracy Crouch. But here was her former title. Former Sports Gambling Charities and Loneliness Minister.
That is quite
What
the combo.
a weird combo that is. How do you divide your workday?
Yeah. So you've got gambling and then you've got the loneliness that comes afterwards if you don't
Gambling,
win.
sports, charities, and loneliness. Don't all 3 of them figure out the 4th?
We could only
If you
be...
give people sports, gambling, and charities, they're not lonely
Yeah,
anymore.
they've got heaps going on. Yeah, I mean, that's just like, look, we've got 4 more things. We've only got 1 more ministership. Just put them all together.
Minister for miscellaneous.
Yeah. Whatever's left.
Minister for someone said no. All right, I got another story coming out of the UK as well. So Professor Mary Beard
That's right.
is a author, academic, and BBC presenter.
What a combo.
And another one. That's the sports gambling charities and loneliness ministers of the BBC. But she is presenting a new program called The Shock of the Nude. Now, everyone slow down.
It's not that kind of podcast.
Everyone
Relax.
slow down. Everyone slow down. But to drum up a bit of hype, I guess she's talking about what she views as like, it's like an art program about nudes and people are like, why are you doing this? with taxpayer money.
What's going on, Mary?
Yeah, what's the deal? But anyway, so Mary's actually come out with a pretty damn good quote, which is, she says that art is basically, quote, soft porn for the elite. Like nudes in art. That's not what the nude is always. That's what the nude is always in danger of being. Always?
Yeah.
Always in danger. Just pornography. Like you just go to the Louvre and you're just like, this is a filth museum.
This is a smut factory. Yeah, look, Mary, I hate to break it to you. I hate to break it to you. No one is going to the National Museum.
Yep.
Like, I have heard, rumour has it that there are images of naked women on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
And no one is paying $20 to get to the museum to watch porn.
Yeah, I just thought she'd walked into a cinema that was like screening like 50 Shades of Grey or something and gone like, this gallery's taken a turn for the worse since I was last in here.
No, so come on, Mary.
Anyway, so that is that story. Anyway, last story we got, Pete.
Well, more nudity, basically. That's what we're talking about
This
here.
is a smut factory.
Almost
this podcast
nudity.
is a smut factory. We have disgraced the good name of Matt Ridley by associating him with this product.
Apparently sex sells. So, look, this was almost a villain, but I really wanted to nail that bloke who helps 1 million people a year. So, this guy was almost a villain. He's an Italian policeman. His name's Alberto.
Save a few more lives and then Peter Gregory will put you in his crosshairs.
Then you'll get, what you really deserve. Alberto Muraglia found himself a laughingstock in Italy in 2015 after he was caught clocking on to work in his police job in his undies. So he was caught doing that on CCTV. It's part of a sting operation. It went national. He lives in an apartment above his police station in San Remo in the northern region of Liguria. And it turns out that sometimes he nips down, clocks on in his jocks, and then goes back upstairs to put his uniform on. Now, the court case was on this week to find out whether he was defrauding the state. His lawyers said the fact that he was in his civilian clothes, that's a bit of a stretch, mate, does not matter because putting on a uniform...
Can't get much more civilian. It's definitely not an official uniform. If you call the police and someone just rocks up in their jocks...
Well, he said his lawyer has claimed that Alberto had foiled a robbery in only his undies before. So that was part of his argument. Anyway, he got off... and it's the national outcry in Italy because this bloke didn't get in trouble.
Well, the other part for me is that it now brings in a precedent that getting dressed for work is actually part of your job and you should be paid for it. Yeah. Which now means that I'm going to turn up to work here every single day dressed as a 17th century French duke and just take 3.5 hours to get ready and just absolutely rake it in.
As long as you don't turn up in your undies, I don't mind.
I like this. So the then Prime Minister Matteo Renzi called it crazy and said officials who bunked off work destroyed the credibility of the public service, to which I'd say officials that come to work on time also destroy the credibility of the public service. And I've got another one here. So I want to ask you, Pete, there's so many great stories about famous public servants getting away with not coming up to work or, clocking.
This kind of stuff.
Part of your billable hours is you getting dressed and making toast.
Yep.
Where does this rank in your all-time bests?
Well, this is up there. I like it because, as people watching on YouTube and Facebook would have seen, we got an image of him in his undies and he's a bit fat, and that's funny. But it just looks funny, all right?
This is highbrow stuff.
Fat policeman. But my favourite is the French government in the city of Toulon a few years ago. I think I pronounced that correctly. It turned out there was 30 bureaucrats in that city who were paid for more than 25 years after they privatised the water authority, but they just kept paying the workers. It's like,
what a win.
25 years. And
25 years, no one thought, where is this money going?
Yeah. And none of them said, oh, actually, we don't work anymore. They all just kept taking it. So that was great. But also there was a French public servant who was given a week to change the font of her report, and it took 25 seconds. So that was another good one.
That's a good one. All right,
the French are pretty good at it.
My number one all time is Joaquin Garcia, the Spanish guy. People might remember this story. He figured out that one part of his job, like he was working in a wastewater treatment plant, and one part of his job thought he was working at the water company. The local authorities thought he was working at the water company. The water company thought he was working at the water company, and so he just didn't turn up to either of those jobs for 6 years, and they only found out about this when they turned up to give him a long-term service check.
Why did he go? Just mail it to me. I can't come. What about the Christmas party?
I think that was surprising him. They were just going to surprise him at his desk. He's not here, whereas he's not at the other place either. Oh, why have we been paying this guy?
What about the Christmas party and stuff? He just never turned up.
Just never turns up.
There you go. What was his name?
Joaquin Garcia.
Come
What
on,
a hero.
Joaquin.
All right, that is it for the show this week. Thanks again to Matt Ridley and Evan Mulholland. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. We're available on all podcast apps, and you can also watch on YouTube, as Pete alluded to. We're on YouTube, on the IPA Facebook page, and also the Generation Liberty YouTube page as well. We're also on Facebook Live. And if you're not already a member of Generation Liberty here at the IPA, you can sign up at ipa.org.au/join. We've got a bunch of memberships as well. Make sure you're liking the Facebook page.
Yep.
Am I missing anything?
Instagram
page, Generation Liberty IPA.
Yep.
Is that all?
I think that's
Just wanna
pretty
make
much
sure
it.
I got this. All right, see you guys next week.